Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! My dad's diagnosis hit us like a wall. One scan, one doctor's visit, and suddenly everything our family had built felt fragile. The bills started piling up fast: hospital stays, medication, specialist appointments. My mom was already stretched thin, working 2 jobs, and my younger sister was still in high school with no way to contribute. I was in my second year of college, dead set on becoming a pilot. Aviation wasn't just a career choice for me. It was the only thing I'd ever wanted. But watching my family struggle while I sat in lecture halls felt wrong, so I made the call. I dropped down to online classes, kept my enrollment active, and started looking for work. The airport posting caught my eye immediately. A fast food chicken spot called Cluckin' Good Chicken had an opening, and the pay was decent, the hours were flexible, and most importantly, it was inside the airport. I figured if I couldn't be in the sky yet, at least I'd be somewhere close to it. What I didn't figure was how many entitled passengers would decide that my bright yellow uniform with a cartoon chicken on the chest made me responsible for every single thing in that building. It started on my first week on the job. I hadn't even clocked in yet. I was walking through the main terminal toward the employee entrance when a woman with an expensive handbag and a permanent scowl planted herself directly in my path and demanded to know where she could rent a car. I told her as politely as I could that I didn't work for the airport, just a chicken restaurant, and suggested she try guest services. She wasn't having it. She pointed at my uniform like it was evidence in a court case and insisted I had to know something. I tried again to explain I was just trying to get to work, but that's when she grabbed my arm. Actually grabbed it, her nails pressing into my skin like she had every right to put her hands on a stranger. I told her to let go and repeated that I had nothing to do with car rentals, then pointed her down the hallway toward where I guessed guest services might be. I had no idea if that was accurate, but I needed to get away from her. She huffed, released my arm, and stormed off in the direction I pointed. I stood there for a moment rubbing my wrist, already reconsidering my life choices. Over the following weeks, I lost count of how many times passengers stopped me to ask about the security checkpoint or where the exit was, standing directly beneath massive signs pointing to both. I started giving short answers and walking away quickly. It wasn't my warmest performance, but it kept me from losing my mind. Then came the wheelchair incident. A flight had just landed and passengers were streaming out of the gate when an elderly woman made a direct line toward me like she had GPS on my location. I was holding a coffee cup. I was wearing a uniform that had a cartoon chicken printed across the chest. She walked right up to me and announced that I was late, demanding to know where her wheelchair was and reminding me that she had specifically requested assistance. I apologized and told her as gently as I could that she had the wrong person. I worked at the chicken place down the hall, not for the airport. She accused me of lying outright and repeated her demand, insisting I was supposed to help her. I was about to try explaining myself a third time when I spotted an actual airport employee in an official uniform walking toward us from behind her, pushing an empty wheelchair. I pointed him out and told her there was her assistant right there, heading our way. She looked at the man, then back at me, then at the man again. Then she muttered that I should have just said so from the beginning and shuffled off toward him, tossing over her shoulder that young people these days were so unhelpful. I stood there staring at the back of her head, genuinely at a loss. But the real moment, the one that changed everything, happened just last week. I was coming back from my break and cutting through the corridor near the employee entrance, which sits right beside the elevator to the airport's private lounge upstairs. When I punched in the access code, a man in a tailored suit appeared at my shoulder and asked what was on the menu for the lounge today, as if I were the concierge he had personally booked. I told him I was sorry, but I had no idea. I didn't work for the airport or the lounge. He looked at me like I had said something offensive and asked what I meant by that, gesturing at my uniform as if that settled the argument. I told him plainly that unless he wanted a chicken sandwich from Cluckin' Good Chicken, I wasn't going to be much help, because that was the only place I worked. That set him off. He told me not to get smart with him, announced that he was a platinum member, and said he demanded to know what was on the menu in a tone that suggested he expected the world to reorganize itself around that fact. Something in me just snapped. Months of entitled passengers grabbed arms and being yelled at for not knowing things that were never my job to know, it all came to a head. I told him that, as a platinum member, he was probably used to the finest dining, but between him and me, our chicken sandwiches were better than anything they were serving upstairs, and that he'd save enough money to buy himself a sense of humor. His face went red. He opened his mouth, but I was already through the door, letting it close behind me. The next morning, my manager was waiting for me with a look I couldn't read. She told me there had been a complaint about my behavior toward a guest the day before. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly which guest. I told her I knew who it was and came clean. I admitted I got frustrated, that I had tried to explain I didn't work for the lounge but he wouldn't hear it, and that what I said at the end probably wasn't the most professional thing to come out of my mouth. My manager held up a hand to stop me and told me she already knew the full picture. Apparently that guest had a long history of harassing staff all across the terminal, and management had been looking for a way to address his behavior for months. She told me they had pulled the camera footage and that my response had given them exactly what they needed to flag his account. Then she said something I genuinely did not expect. She told me it was good work. Before I could process that, she kept going. She said airport management had been so impressed with how I'd handled the whole thing that they wanted to offer me a position on their customer service team. Their words, as she repeated them, were that anyone who could handle entitled passengers with that kind of composure under pressure was exactly who they needed. It wasn't the pilot's seat I'd been working toward, but it was the airport. It was a foot in a door I hadn't even thought to knock on. And after everything was my dad, after the bills and the dropped classes and the months of getting grabbed and yelled at by strangers in a cartoon chicken uniform, I'd take it. I accepted on the spot. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I made a note to keep an eye out for that platinum member, because next time he came through demanding to know what was on the menu, I'd actually be authorized to tell him it was none of his business. When I was a kid, I brought home a stray dog that had been wandering our neighborhood for days. My mom wasn't thrilled, but she let me keep him. After that, it just became part of who I am. Right now, I've got 2 rescue dogs and 3 cats at home. All of them picked up from the streets at one point or another. My girlfriend jokes that I'd bring home a raccoon if it looked sad enough. That morning was already off to a rough start. One of my dogs had gotten sick during the night, and I spent a good chunk of the early hours cleaning up the mess, making sure he was comfortable, checking his temperature, watching him to see if I needed to be worried. By the time I was satisfied he'd be okay, I was running seriously late. I threw on my clothes, grabbed a coffee I barely had time to drink, and jumped in my old Honda Civic hoping the traffic gods would be kind to me. They were not. I was about halfway to work, still mentally running through everything I needed to do once I got there, when I saw something in the middle of the road. My brain told me it was roadkill. My eyes told me it was moving. I slowed down and leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. It was a kitten. Tiny, gray, sitting completely frozen in the middle of my lane while cars flew past it on both sides. My stomach dropped. I didn't overthink it. I hit my blinkers, pulled over to the shoulder, and got out. Traffic was picking up fast. I stepped out toward the road and started waving my arms, trying to get people to slow down, shouting at passing drivers that there was a kitten in the road and they needed to stop. Most of them just swerved around me like I was a pothole. A couple honked. One guy rolled down his window just to glare at me. But then I heard a motorcycle engine slow down, and a biker pulled up and climbed off his bike. He asked me what was going on. I told him there was a kitten frozen in the middle of the lane and that I was trying to get traffic to stop long enough to grab it safely. He didn't ask any follow-up questions. He just nodded and moved to the other side of me, and together we started flagging cars down. Between the two of us, we managed to get the flow of traffic to actually slow. A few drivers stopped. others crept past carefully once they saw what was happening. He told me to go get the kitten and that he'd hold the traffic back. I turned toward the kitten and started walking slowly, keeping my voice low, telling it softly that everything was okay and that I was there to help. It was shaking so hard I could see it from 10 feet away. Its eyes were huge and locked onto me. I crouched down and reached out my hand, letting it catch my scent, the way you're supposed to with a frightened animal. I was maybe 2 feet away when the biker shouted at me to watch out. I looked up. A car was coming straight at us. Not slowing, not swerving, just coming. I grabbed for the kitten and tried to throw myself sideways, but I wasn't fast enough. The impact hit me hard, and then I was in the air, and then I was on the ground, and everything was noise and pain and the smell of asphalt. After that, things got fragmented. I remember the sound of tires screeching. I remember voices that felt far away. I tried to push myself up to see if the kitten was okay, if the biker was okay, but my body just wouldn't move the way I was telling it to. Everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital bed. There were bandages on my arms and every breath felt like someone was pressing a hot iron against my rib cage. A nurse told me I had multiple bruises and 2 broken ribs, but nothing permanent. She also mentioned that the biker who had helped me was a few rooms down with similar injuries. The first thing I asked her was whether anyone knew what had happened to the kitten. She told me she didn't know anything about a kitten, but that there was a police officer outside who wanted to speak with me and that he might be able to tell me more. The officer came in and asked me to walk him through everything that had happened. After I did, he filled in the gaps. He told me the driver had taken off right after hitting us and tried to flee the scene entirely, but that a group of bikers further back in traffic had seen the whole thing and chased her down. She ended up losing control and crashing into a pole about half a mile away, and they arrested her right there on the spot. I asked if she'd been hurt. He said she had minor injuries, nothing close to what she'd done to me and the biker who had helped me. Then he told me she had been drunk well over the legal limit at 8 in the morning. I stared at the ceiling for a second, trying to wrap my head around that. I asked what was going to happen to her. He said she was looking at charges for driving under the influence, hit and run, and assault with a deadly weapon, and that given her blood alcohol level and the fact that she had fled the scene, she was probably looking at serious time behind bars. Then I remembered what actually mattered and asked him about the kitten. Something in his expression shifted, went a little softer. He told me that one of the bikers had grabbed it right after I got hit, and that the last he heard, they were taking it to a vet to get checked out. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. Over the next few days, I got the full picture. The woman who hit us had 2 prior driving under the influence convictions and had been driving on a suspended license. This was strike 3, and the witnesses were plentiful. Multiple bikers had seen everything. There was traffic camera footage. Her blood alcohol level at the scene was more than twice the legal limit. The biker who had helped me came by my room to check in. His name was Nicky. We ended up talking for a couple of hours, swapping stories, and it turned out we had a lot in common, including the fact that he had 3 dogs at home that he'd rescued off the street. He told me I should have seen the other bikers go after that car, and that she hadn't even made it to the highway. I told him I still couldn't believe she had tried to run. He pointed out that she was drunk at 8 in the morning and had just hit 2 people. So what exactly did she think was going to happen? We both laughed, then immediately both regretted it because laughing with broken ribs is its own special kind of misery. A few days after that, another biker I didn't recognize knocked on my hospital room door. He was big, leather jacket, the kind of person you wouldn't want to cut off in traffic. He was holding something inside his jacket. He told me he'd heard I had been asking about the kitten every time someone came to visit. I told him I had. He said the kitten was okay, that he'd been dehydrated and scared when they got him to the vet, but that nothing was seriously wrong. He told me one of the guys from their group had been planning to take him in, but then they heard about me and figured things should go a different way. He reached into his jacket and held out a small gray kitten. I didn't say anything for a second. I just looked at it. He told me it was the same one. Said his buddy decided I was the reason the kitten was alive and that it made more sense for him to be with me. I took the kitten as carefully as I could with my banged up arms. He mewed once, quietly, and pushed his face into my chest. I had to look at the ceiling for a second because I was not about to cry in front of a biker who had just done something genuinely kind. I thanked him and meant every word of it. He just nodded and left. The trial was a few months later. Nikki and I both went. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses consistent, and the judge had clearly read every prior offense in Karen's file before walking into that courtroom. 15 years in prison, permanent revocation of her license, $50,000 in fines, 10 years of probation after release. When the bailiff moved to escort her out, Karen turned and looked directly at us, pointing the blame squarely in our direction. She said it was our fault and that, if we hadn't been standing in the road, none of it would have happened. Nikki and I looked at each other. I said she was blaming us for her drunk driving. He just said, "Yep." I said, "Okay." We watched them lead her out in handcuffs. Walking out of the courthouse, Nikki asked me how the little guy was doing. I told him the kitten had fit right in with the others at home, and that my girlfriend had told me absolutely no more animals. Then turned around and named him Lucky within 48 hours. Nikki laughed, and this time our ribs had healed enough that it didn't hurt. My parents always had this vision for me: head down, study hard, don't get distracted. And for the most part, I followed that. By going into my third year studying environmental science, I wanted to prove something, mostly to myself, that I could handle real responsibility alongside everything else. And if it came with a paycheck, even better. Getting this summer job at the park was no joke. Hundreds of people applied for a handful of spots. I showed up to the interview enthusiastic, flexible on hours, and ready to take on whatever they threw at me. It worked. I got the position. I was assigned to one of the main roller coasters, checking tickets, loading guests, locking restraints, monitoring the ride throughout the day. It sounds simple until you're doing it in 90-degree heat, with a line stretching halfway across the park and guests who haven't eaten anything but funnel cake taking their frustration out on you. The one thing that got me through those long, sweaty shifts was my water bottle. Not just any bottle either. I brought it back from a trip to Japan the year before, and the design on it was this small hand-painted illustration that I picked out myself from a little market stall in Kyoto. It always made me smile when I looked at it. More importantly, it kept my water cold for hours. On days like this one, it was basically a survival tool. I kept it on a small shelf right at my station within arm's reach between ride cycles. Everyone who worked near me knew it was mine. The day had already been rough. A few guests had gotten snippy about wait times. One guy had tried to sneak his kid onto the ride even though she was clearly too short, and the heat was relentless. I was running on about 4 hours of sleep and whatever was left in that bottle. During one of the loading cycles, I was going down the road checking restraints when something made me stop. A man in his late 30s, sitting in one of the middle cars with his wife and a little girl, was holding something familiar. My stomach dropped. It was my water bottle. I watched him pass it to his wife. She took a sip and handed it to their daughter. The three of them completely unbothered, like they hadn't just taken something off an employee's station in broad daylight. I finished checking the restraints. I started the ride, and the whole 90 seconds it ran. I stood there with my jaw tight, thinking about what I was going to do. When they came off the ride, I stepped over and told the man directly that the water bottle he was holding was mine. He looked at me, then at the bottle, then back at me. The color drained out of his face instantly. He stumbled over his words, claiming he thought someone had left it behind and that he was planning to hand it in. It was sitting 12 inches from the control panel at a staffed station. There was no version of that story that made sense. He knew it. I knew it. We both just stood there knowing it. Then he asked almost sheepishly if I wanted it back. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and standing in front of a man who had just lied to my face after drinking from my personal water bottle and letting his kid drink from it too. Something clicked. I told him to keep it, but I made sure to mention that I had oral herpes and that it had been flaring up that day. I pointed to a small sore on the inside of my lip. It was from biting my cheek during lunch, but he didn't know that. The man's face went completely still. He turned to his wife and whispered something to her. Whatever he said hit her like a truck. She spun around and unloaded on me, calling me a horrible person and demanding to know how I could do something like that to them. I told her that they had taken my water bottle from my station and drunk out of it, and that I had thought they deserved to know. She opened her mouth, closed it again. The little girl stood there hugging the bottle with both arms, completely confused about why her parents were suddenly in crisis mode. I turned around and went back to my station. Behind me, I could hear them arguing in hushed, urgent voices. Someone was apparently Googling something. I didn't look back. By the time my shift ended, I'd half convinced myself I'd done something terrible and half convinced myself I'd done exactly the right thing. I called my best friend on the walk to my car and told her everything, expecting at least a mild lecture. She didn't give me one. She laughed and said they absolutely deserved it. That stealing from someone who's standing right there, working in the heat, isn't a mistake, and lying about it to their face afterward makes it even worse. She told me not to feel guilty about it because they made their choice and this was just karma catching up to them. She wasn't wrong. They could have walked up to me and said they'd grabbed it by mistake. They could have apologized and handed it back when I first said something. Instead, the man lied and the wife screamed at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I bought a new water bottle the next day, kept it in my bag, zipped shut, completely out of sight for the rest of the summer. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.